Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Tom's Gadget Garage. Today I am cruising around on the newly released Lectric XP4. This literally arrived at my doorstep yesterday afternoon, and late last night I was getting this thing out of the box, which I'll tell you is really easy. This thing basically came fully assembled, and now I'm riding around making sure I don't have any kind of mechanical or electrical gremlins before I start taking this out on all of my end-to-end testing. When I got this thing out of the box, the only odd thing that I noticed was that the chain wasn't on the chain ring. It must have popped off during shipping, or maybe when they were loading it into the box, but that was an easy fix. I just popped the chain back on, looked over the bike, and really no other issues at all whatsoever. The one thing I did do though, and I mentioned this in my first impressions ride when I was out at the Grand Canyon, is that the batteries on these, at least the pre-production version, didn't have any foam pads. Good news is this particular one did have foam pads. So it looks like those are installed on the production units. So that's nice. It'll help keep the battery from banging around, but I still put my Velcro strips in there because I don't think there were enough foam pads. And to be honest with you, I'm not a fan of those foam pads because they've got like a tacky texture to them. And so they have a tendency to roll off, which one of them had already rolled off. And so, I'll show you a picture here, but I added some of those Velcro strips in there, ultimately to ensure that we've got a nice fit with the battery inside the frame. And it also helps prevent that battery from like torpedoing out when you unfold it and unlock the battery with the key. You don't want that thing sliding out and hitting the ground. And so I like a little bit of a tighter fit with that. Something else you're going to want to do before your first ride is just make sure everything is nice and tight. Go over all the bolts and everything. You never know what happens during shipping, or whether somebody was having an off day when they were assembling your bike. Just make sure everything is nice and tight. All the critical components on here were well torqued down, so no issues there. The only thing I really had to tighten down was this control pad. It was a little loose, so I just tightened that and I put it in the position that I like. And then the screen mount here, I just tightened the two little hex screws on there, and now everything's perfect. Brake levers, everything were already torqued down to spec, and so overall came out of the box in excellent condition. But the beautiful thing about this bike is that there's essentially no assembly required aside from inserting the handlebar into the collapsible handlebar stem here. And that's pretty much it, and then you just clamp that down, adjust your seat, attach the pedals, and you're ready to rock and roll. Obviously you're going to want to fully charge the battery before you go out on your first ride. But out of the box, this thing pretty much comes out almost ready to go. Now, if you're coming from Lectric XP 3.0, one of the things you'll immediately notice is that the handlebars are closer to you. There's less of a stretch to get your hands out there. And that's because they have this a 0-degree stem. So the stem actually lines up, with the front fork. Whereas before, the stem would come out at a forward angle, which would give you more of that stretch. So that's one of the things that I immediately noticed hopping onto this. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and cross on over to this bike path here. So this bike here does have 5-speed modes, which is, kind of the labeling is a little bit different than any of the other electric bikes, because, if you go ride any other electric bike, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. With this, it's Eco, Tour, Sport, Sport Plus, and Turbo. And so Turbo being kind of the most aggressive acceleration settings, most torque, and then Eco being the least. You've also got the option to turn it off completely, which I'll do right now. I'm going to start pedaling. We're in gear 1. Go ahead and switch over to gear 2. Moving around at about 6 miles an hour, go gear 3. And so that's very manageable. Cruising around 8 miles an hour or so, maybe a little bit more. If you run out of power, it's not the end of the world, because you can just pedal this bike like you would a normal bike. So I would say gear 2, gear 3 are probably going to be best for riding around without power. Now this bike does have that torque sensor, so it is a pressure-based system. So if you want more output from the bike, you're going to put more pressure to the pedals. And when you do that, as you can see, our speed is 17 miles an hour at this point. I can go up into gear 7, tour mode, about 17 miles an hour. So I put more pressure to the pedals, and there we go. And once you apply that pressure and you get the momentum going and your legs turning, it's very easy to maintain speed. It's definitely different than a cadence sensor. With those cadence sensors, you don't have to put pressure to the pedals. As long as those pedals are moving, even though you're lightly touching those pedals, as long as they're moving, that motor is going to deliver power. With torque sensors, you're going to get a much more natural ride feel. And if you're coming from a cadence sensor e-bike, it might take a little bit to get used to, but me personally, it's one of my favorite setups on e-bikes. All right, so as you can see right now, I'm coming to a stop, but I'm not in the appropriate gear. I am in gear 7. All right, so if I'm going to start pedaling this, it might be a little bit of a struggle, but I'm going to use my throttle here to get us going. And there you go. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and bump us into Sport Plus. And Sport Plus is just going to give us more power output, more torque. It's going to get us up to speed a lot quicker. And once I put some pressure to the pedals, we're at, about 20 miles an hour. I'm going to hop into gear 8. And this is very comfortable. Now they do have this massive 56 tooth chain ring on here, which means I'm nowhere near ghost pedaling. Throughout the entire speed range, I like to have resistance against the pedal. Some bikes, have a smaller chain ring, have different gear setup, and you get more of that ghost pedaling, which I'm not a huge fan of, especially on a torque sensor e-bike. Something that really surprised me with this bike out of the box is that there was no brake rub on the rotor. Sometimes you pull bikes out of the box, you spin the wheels, and you can hear the rotors rubbing up against the brake pads, which means that things aren't aligned properly. And so then I have to go get out my Allen keys and my little brake shims and work in there and make sure everything's adjusted properly. I didn't have to do that with this bike. So that's fantastic. That's music to my ears. Another thing to mention is that the shifting on the bike is fantastic out of the box. Everything is shifting very nice. Nothing's hanging up in gears or anything like that. And so I don't have to make any kind of derailleur adjustments. So definitely another pro. All right, brakes are solid. One thing to mention about any new bike is that when you first take it out of the box and you start riding for a bit, the brakes might be a little soft, so you definitely want to go take it out and bed those brakes in. You might have to do a couple, more aggressive stops, just to get everything nicely seated. But yeah, once you start getting the miles on, the brakes become even better. These brakes definitely have a good feel to them. I'll be doing my hill climb test up a mountain. We'll go to South Mountain with this bike, see how it's like riding this new torque sensor up 17.5 miles of windy mountain roads. And then on the downside of that mountain, we'll have ample opportunity to test out the brakes. I don't suspect we'll have any issues. That's one thing, you ride up a mountain like that and it's miles and miles of just straight downhill riding, which is always fun. All right. So in turbo mode, oh yeah, that power's immediate. So, you are off to the races, and we are already at 20 miles an hour. It's going to cap us at that for class 2 bike mode. All right, we'll do a nice little brake test, see how this does from 20 in 3, 2, 1, go. Oh yeah, these are solid brakes. Let's pick up speed again. One more time. Boom, we got it. All right, oh, looks like we might have the light. Oh, maybe not. 3 seconds to spare. I'll just wait for the next light cycle here. And once again, I am at this intersection in gear 7. Definitely the wrong gear to get going from a start, but once again, I've got that throttle here on the left. That'll help us get going. Okay, here we go. That throttle definitely comes in handy. All right, let's see how nimble this bike is. Gotta take this sharp turn, and we made it. You know, once we get to some other open streets, we'll test out the bike in Class 3 mode. Basically, the whole purpose of this ride is just to make sure from a mechanical and electrical perspective, everything is good. Because I'm gonna be jumping straight into, you know, things like our range tests, a hill climb test. You know, range, I'm sure this bike is gonna get 40 plus miles, no problem at all. So I don't wanna get stranded on that if there's some kind of issue. All right, so let's go ahead and try cruise control out. So this bike, of course, does have cruise control, like pretty much all of Lectric's bikes. And the way that you enable it, you can't do it while pedaling, it has to be when you're using throttle. And this bike does give you granular control of your speed with the throttle, so that is nice. You've got this down button, this minus button. You have to hold down the throttle with one finger and then hold down the minus button with another one. It's a little bit tricky, but then cruise control is enabled. And there we go. I don't have to do anything. I'm just cruising and it's activated. That is one problem with having a throttle on the left-hand side of the bike, is that when it comes to activating cruise control, you're over here fiddling around with this stuff, you know, with two fingers, like it's awkward. All right, so we are coming into this dog park area. Give us an opportunity to take this on some hills here. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and cut through here, test out this front fork suspension. Right up and over. If you want to adjust the preload on the suspension, you have the ability to do that. You could also lock it out. So those are always options for you. Kind of tune the ride to your needs. We're coming through here, bumpy grass. Front suspension's doing a good job. It's not the same kind of suspension that you have on the XPedition 2.0 or the XPeak. Those have superior suspension setups. But it's very reminiscent of what we have on the XP 3.0. So this hill here between the trees is a 20% grade. So I'm going to go ahead and go into a lower speed setting. I'm going to bump up into turbo, and we're going to go try this bike up a 20% grade. Here we go, folks. 20%. We made it right up and over that. No problem at all. 750 nominal watts of power, 1310 peak watts of power, and 85 Newton meters of torque. Let's try this embankment. I don't think I've measured that one. Maybe I have, I don't know. We're gonna slow down a bit, and then we're gonna turn right into it in turbo mode. My gosh, that is easy. Folks, I don't care what kind of hills you have in your area, you're not gonna have an issue getting up them with this bike. All right, so I'm gonna cross this bridge here and I'll give you a closer look at this bike. All right, we'll come through here. Keep in mind this bike is 20-inch wheels, so when you're, let's say, leaning to the right, make sure that right foot is either in the level or up position, because your pedals are lower to the ground on this bike. So if you have your pedal in the down position and then you turn, you're likely going to scrape the pedal on the ground. All right, I'm gonna pull over to the side here for a moment and give you a quick look at this bike. All right, folks, there she is. That is the Lectric XP4. This is the step-through edition, 750 watt motor, 17.5 amp hour battery in the Raindrop Blue, which is the same color that my XPedition 2.0 is in, and I absolutely love it. Bike overall very clean. One thing I will mention, this Elite headlight that the 750 watt motor comes with, just be sure to crank this down. You know, it comes kind of loose out of the box, so just tighten it. You have to tighten it from both sides at the same time. That way you don't have that thing bouncing around. There's that front fork suspension that helped us gracefully go over that grass. This particular one comes with their comfort seat. Believe it or not, this is the first time I've ever tested Lectric's comfort seat. Normally I use my Cloud 9 seat, so I'm eager to see how this thing performs. And then of course it's got this suspension seat post, which also does a good job of absorbing impact. And then of course we've got our rack here in the back and all that fun stuff. So very happy with the looks of this bike. I really do like this color. Originally I was kind of partial to the green color that they had, but I know that's in high demand. And anyways, I'm happy with this Raindrop Blue. I think it looks really good with the black fenders, black tires, and all that fun stuff. Now, one thing I do recommend is when you come to a stop, and if you're not going to power off the bike, just hit the minus button and turn off the pedal assist. That way, if you're maneuvering the bike, you don't accidentally hit that throttle and have the bike take off on you. All right, folks, I'm going to go ahead and put this bike into Class 3 mode. The way you do that is you hit the plus and minus button here on the control pad. That's going to take you into the advanced settings menu. You use the minus button to go to bike classification. You're going to go ahead and hit the power button to get into that. And I'm going to switch this to Class 3. Looks like they've even got a California Class 3 in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on the power button to select that. And then I'll hit the plus and minus button to get out of this menu. And there we go. We're officially in Class 3 mode. That way we can see how quickly this bike gets up to 28 miles an hour. So that menu system is a huge upgrade over the previous generation Lectric LCD screens, because you can go in there in plain English, user-readable format, and select your settings. You don't have to worry about memorizing P settings or anything like that. It's all right there in front of you, so you no longer have to carry that manual with you just to, you know, adjust the P settings on your bike on the go. All right, folks, I'm gonna go ahead and downshift here for a bit. We're gonna make sure we're in turbo mode, and we are. Let's go ahead and see if we can get up to 28 miles an hour. Gear shift is very smooth. 22, 23, 27, 28 on the screen. Not even anywhere close to ghost pedaling, folks. 56 tooth chainring for the win. And we're cruising around 27, 28 miles an hour. No problem at all. Very smooth ride. Very good gearing on this bike. I'm happy to see that. All right. Let's slow it down here. So if you want to go 28 miles an hour, you can absolutely do it on this bike, and you can do it without having to pedal like a crazy person, you know? All right, I'm going to drop back down into sport mode. We'll turn around and we're gonna hop back onto that bike path. So if I can characterize this bike in one word, it's smooth. You know, they did a very good job. They definitely listened to their customers with this bike, and so it's nice to see. Something to call out is that the demo unit I tested when I was up at the Grand Canyon at their media day event had a bell. Okay, I just want to tell you right now, this bike does not have a bell. And so, if you want a bell, you're gonna have to get one. And you know, a lot of Lectric's bikes don't have bells. I call it rebel against the bell, I don't know. They just don't come with bells. They sell a bell, so you can use one of their bells, or you can go online. I actually found this pretty nifty little bell. I got it installed on my bike. I can't remember who makes it, but it looks pretty awesome. But anyways, otherwise you're gonna be like on your left, you know, which is what I do anyways, let's be honest. I don't always use the bell, but it's a nice thing to have, especially if you're in a kind of crowded place with a lot of pedestrians. It's not gonna do you much good with cars, that's for sure, but for pedestrians, the bell definitely helps out. So what do I think about the production version of this Lectric XP4 so far? Very smooth, very dialed in, immediate power delivery, really strong, you know, motor performance, which is gonna lend very well to climbing hills. If you wanna ride at 28 miles an hour in areas that you can do that, you absolutely can. You're not gonna have to worry about ghost pedaling and, you know, having the bike outpace your ability to pedal. So, I mean, they've done a fantastic job with this bike. They've definitely upped the competition in the folding e-bike space. It's always good for the consumer when you've got companies going head to head. So we'll see what some of these other folks come to market with in response to this bike. What's even crazier though is that for the 500 watt motor version of this, which should have more than enough power for pretty much all of your riding scenarios as well, because I know that the XP 3.0 did, they kept the price the same, $999. Like, that's insane. Now, I will say, there is no longer a made in China label on that box. It now says made in Cambodia. And, you know, I was curious to see what that means from like a quality perspective, if there's gonna be any difference, right? Because you make bikes in a certain place for a long time, you build a lot of that knowledge and, you know, kind of muscle memory and building these bikes. And so when you switch to, you know, manufacturing these things somewhere else, sometimes you can, you know, have little friction points. But the welds are beautiful on this bike, very well assembled. Came in one piece, no flat tire. If you watch my Lectric XP 3.0 series, I was bummed out because that was my first e-bike that I bought on this channel, and it came with a flat tire. That was like a big downer. No flat tire here, folks. All right, intersection is clear. But yeah, you know, the whole purpose of today's ride, I actually wasn't even gonna film this. I was just gonna go ride. But I figured I'd bring y'all on the journey with me. It's always good, you know, when you get a new bike, get it charged up, make sure all your bolts are nice and tight. When you do get this bike out of the box, you know, and you want to fold it up, there's a little red plastic tab. So when you're folding the bike up, you need to remove that first. That way you don't damage the prongs that go into the port for the controller. So just make sure you remove that. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to fold the bike. You'll see it. It stands out like a sore thumb, but you know, I almost missed it because I'm excited, you know. It's like, oh, new bike, let's get it out. Let's go see what this thing's all about. I almost made the mistake of trying to close it with that, so just remove that. But yeah, when you get this bike out of the box, just make sure the tires are properly inflated. I think they call for 25 to 45 PSI. I've got this at 32, which so far is really nice. I'll probably bump that up a little bit for my range test. You know, just make sure everything's nice and tight, fully charged, and head out on your first ride. All right, folks, before we wrap this up, I'm gonna go ahead and show you how the throttle responds on this bike. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit the throttle in turbo mode. Oh, you can definitely feel the power kick in. Should cap us at 20 miles an hour. And there we go. Stopped us at 20. So very responsive throttle. So if you're looking for a bike that you can pedal, or if you're looking for a bike that you can cruise around throttle only, you can absolutely do that. And just keep in mind, I will be doing a full-length range test in pedal assist, as well as throttle only. And then, of course, I'm going to be doing my hill climb test and all that fun stuff. So stay tuned for all of that. And let me know if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns. Happy to address those in the comment section below. And as always, thank you so much for tuning into Tom's Gadget Garage. We'll see you next time.